who knew we'd have so many questions about voting, right? But then, who knew that we'd have a nominee for the Supreme Court who doesn't know that it's a crime to harass or intimidate someone at the polling place, or that the Constitution doesn't give a president the right to move the date of an election, or that climate change is too controversial for her to take a position. I think maybe it's time for some good news. What do you think? Ready? Grocery bags, straws, stir sticks, 6-pack rings, utensils, and food containers by the end of 2021. The rollout was announced as part of Canada's goal to achieve zero plastic waste by 2030. This is a great goal. Maybe we'll do that too after we win. We have 18 days till the election, and we need everyone who can to join our volunteer team. We have more than 15,000 volunteers that have been doing incredible work these last months. Because of their tireless efforts, we will have hit our 2 million person goal this week. In other words, we're going to go beyond 2 million people. That's 2 million more potential voters for climate justice. And we'll continue pushing as hard as we can in order to reach every possible voter in battleground states all the way through November 3rd. Now is a great time to get involved. Besides, it's fun and interesting, and you don't have to take my word for it. Here are a few quotes from our volunteers. These are people who follow me on my blog and send me these letters. This is from Kara, who says, quote, being a text team leader with Fire Drill Fridays Greenpeace is such a wonderful honor and opportunity. Reaching out to voters across the country has been quite the experience. Having lifetime Republicans tell me they are, for the first time in their lives, voting blue is something I will never forget. One gentleman told me he was changing for his new grandbaby. He wants her to have clean air when he's gone. It was so moving. Yeah. And then Robin says, I'm now a leader on our text team, and I'm constantly amazed by all the hard work everyone has been putting in together. The voter outreach campaign we've been working on over the last few months has given me so much hope for the upcoming election and has assured me that we are making a difference. See, so please, y'all go to firedrillfriday.com/vote and sign up as a volunteer now. My guest today is Shaniqua McClendon, who's worked in politics for a decade and currently serves as political director for Crooked Media, home to the popular podcast Pod Save America. In this role, Shaniqua led the creation of their midterm voter engagement program, Vote Save America, which supported the 2018 Democratic victories across the country. Prior to Crooked Media, Shaniqua began her career as a White House intern for President Obama. She then went on to Capitol Hill, where she served as a policy advisor to Senator Kay Hagan and legislative director to Congresswoman Alma S, where she spearheaded the creation of the first ever congressional bipartisan HBCU caucus. Shaniqua earned a master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where she received the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Excellence in Service. Welcome, Shaniqua. I'm so grateful that you're taking the time to join us on Fire Drill Fridays. I know how busy things are for you right now. But listen, while our audience is getting their questions ready, will you talk us through what Crooked Media says folks should do to vote?
Yeah, we actually on Monday, I think, rolled out our Build Your Own Ballot tool. So we're telling everyone to vote now. If you have your mail-in ballot already, just go ahead and get it filled out and turn it in. If you are going to vote in person and you plan on doing that early, just go ahead and get it done. Find where your local polling location is and go do that. But we are encouraging people to use our ballot tool, our Build Your Own Ballot tool, where you can actually go in and type in your address, and it will pull up a sample ballot for you. You can see all the candidates who are on your ballot, but you can also see your statewide ballot initiatives, which are typically written in really legalese terms, but we went through and just put it in plain English and let people know if they vote yes, this is what this means. And if you vote no, this is what this means. And once you do that, the tool actually allows you to make a plan to vote. So you can find your polling location, pick a time that you'll go, and get reminders so that you will do it at that time. So that's what we are telling everyone to get done right now.
I mailed my ballot yesterday from the post office.
And you've already done it.
Yeah, yeah. Maddie, we've asked, because this is going to concentrate more on the audience questions. So do you have any yet?
We sure do. And I encourage everyone to please submit your questions in the chat box and the Q&A section. So from Tony on Zoom, Shaniqua, what have you been most surprised about with this election cycle compared to 2018?
Yeah, you know, in 2018, it was kind of our voters' first election since the 2016 presidential election to kind of respond to maybe what they were feeling. And we saw a lot of enthusiasm. And I knew in 2020 we were going to see more, but it's completely just exceeded my expectations. When the coronavirus pandemic really hit us and people had to start staying home and, you know, not being able to see loved ones, I thought that would have a negative impact on how much people wanted to be engaged in the election. But it actually, you know, I think after we got over the initial shock of what was happening in our world, that people started to realize that government plays a significant role in how we respond to coronavirus, but just our lives in general. And people started signing up for our volunteer shifts. They started donating to the different funds that we have at Crooked Media through Vote Save America. And, you know, I was just really surprised by that. I guess I shouldn't be, because over the past few years, we've seen people really increase their political engagement. But I just really thought this would be the thing that kind of made people not want to do anything except care about the issues that were immediately in front of them, making sure their rent was paid, food was on the table. But I think people realized that all of that is tied together, and they showed up. And even when we saw, you know, the police violence incidents and, you know, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia with the three men who, you know, kind of chased him down and murdered him, I, again, wasn't expecting to see people pour into the streets the way they did because of the pandemic, and they did. So I think the biggest thing that I've been surprised about is that the pandemic has not dampened people's will to participate in our, just be civically engaged and call on our elected leaders to do stuff, but it's actually motivated them a lot more.
Thank you. From Jessica on Instagram, what messages are you seeing really resonate with people right now? Yeah,
kind of building on what I just said, there's not really any way for anyone to escape the impact of coronavirus. If you know, personally haven't been infected with coronavirus, you probably know someone who has. And a lot of people have also experienced, unfortunately, loss because of it. So really focusing on how people's vote can tie into just the immediate steps and response we see to coronavirus. And also really driving home the importance of voting not just being the only thing that we have to do to be civically engaged. Voting is very important. It will determine who gets into these elected offices that everyone's been talking about for the past year. But we can't just elect people and, you know, leave them to do whatever they want. We have to continue to show up. And I think people are really starting to understand that now. If you look at the Democratic primary, there were a lot of people who did not select Joe Biden as their candidate in the primary. But as you see, and even on the Republican side, people come around the person that's at the top of the ticket. And so around the person at the top of the ticket, but also I think are starting to realize we can't just stop right there. We have to continue to hold them accountable, and whatever they said they were going to do on the campaign trail, bring those things up. And when they're not doing them, you know, we always have more elections to make sure that they will listen next time.
Yeah. Can I jump in with a question? I'm curious, Shaniqua. We hear so much about voter suppression. How do you see this? How worried are you about voter suppression?
Yeah, you know, I am from North Carolina, a state that is just notorious for voter suppression. Right. And I think this year it's been as bad as I've seen it in North Carolina, I think throughout the country, we've seen it really bad. And even during the primary, and most recently, you look at Georgia, where people were waiting 5 hours to vote. I know a lot of people were saying, I'm going to stay out here. Nothing can deter me. And that's great, but you should not have to wait 5 hours to vote. And even seeing a lot of the lawsuits that have popped up in states in response to state and local governments making it easier to vote, we've seen people challenge that so that it's harder to vote, which, we should not be making voting harder. Anything, for me, voter suppression is anything that makes it unnecessarily difficult to vote. And all of these obstacles that are being put in place are making it more difficult to vote. And then again, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so a lot more people will be voting by mail this year. You have to do everything just right to vote by mail. You have to make sure that you seal your envelope, sign it with a signature that matches the one you have on your registration forms. And also, in some states, you have to get 1 or 2 people to actually sign your ballot or sign your ballot envelope as a witness. So there's so much out there that could disenfranchise people and they don't even know. But what I will say is, as bad as the voter suppression has been this year, in my role, we spend a lot of time talking to grassroots organizations who are on the ground in states that have really bad voter suppression. And instead of just kind of buckling to it, they are evaluating where we are and they're responding to it. So if people need IDs, they're getting people IDs. If people need more understanding on how to fill out their ballot and do it accurately, they are getting them that information. And you even have organizations who are bringing food to the polls, so people who do have to stand in line for 5 hours have something to eat and aren't discouraged. So, a better solution would be us not having voter suppression, but I think a lot of activists on the ground are meeting the moment and doing what we can.
Thanks. Maddie, let's have another audience question.
Definitely. From Anna on Facebook, your Get Mitch or Die Trying campaign has raised millions of dollars to help flip the Senate. Why do you think it's caught on in such a big way, and how are you making the magic happen?
Yes. I think first and foremost, it has a very catchy name. It's a play off with 50 Cent's album, or his first album. But I think more than that, people are, again, just starting to see the role that government plays. And I know I keep talking about the coronavirus pandemic, but we have seen, House Democrats pass multiple pieces of legislation to respond to the coronavirus pandemic, and it's stalled in the Senate. And that is due in large part to the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. So a lot of people are seeing efforts to help Americans be stopped because of the Senate. And that's, people want to see more accountability. So they are looking at the Senate, who has not kind of upheld their duty as senators to be a check on the White House. So people are really frustrated with the Senate. But where our fund really started to take off, we started the fund in July of last year, just recognizing that, there was a big change in the House in 2018, and maybe we should try to see if we can help make that happen in 2020. And then after Justice Ginsburg passed away last month, we had this fund. We were all just kind of taking the news in, and we started to see people just donate to this fund. So I think more than anything, we had something and people had a lot of energy and they didn't know where to put it. And that fund was just sitting and ready and waiting for people's energy and thinking, we don't get to elect our Supreme Court justices, but we do get to elect the people who confirm them. And I think a lot of the new donors that we saw, I think we, in the first few days, saw almost 200,000 new donors donating to this fund. And I think it was because they were looking for something to do to have an impact on the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens as the process is playing out in the Senate. But again, people are just really starting to connect all the dots on how all of this fits together to impact their lives.
I just want to add on to that. It's occurred to me that if there's anything positive that's come out of these last 4 years, it's that people have learned a lot more about how government works, who does what, what's important, how important these Supreme Court votes are. And, not enough people are taught civics, right? So we're all scrambling to learn everything we can, and we are learning, and it's going to make a big difference in the next 4 years too.
I would just add, people should not feel bad. I took civics in high school, but it wasn't until I worked on Capitol Hill that I actually understood what was going on. So no one should feel bad that they're just starting to understand it.
Maddie?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions around sort of, what there is to fear and concern. So from Audrey on Zoom, what are you most afraid of for this election season, and what can all of us do to help keep those nightmares at bay?
Yeah, I think my biggest fear is misinformation that can also be another form of voter suppression, discouraging people to vote by spreading misinformation, things that are not true. I think if you spend any time online, you see some of the crazy things that manage to kind of seep into the political environment. And, someone shared an ad with me last week where I feel like you'll be able to guess where it came from, but it said that Joe Biden was in favor of post-labor abortions. Now, that is murder. That means that a child has been born and somehow you could abort it after, but that isn't a campaign ad for a candidate. And that's the kind of information that's being used to make people either, say, oh, both of these candidates are bad and I want nothing to do with it, or think something about one candidate that just isn't true. And we should have honest information as we're considering who we want to vote for. And then we saw what happened in 2016. There was just a lot of misinformation that deterred a lot of people from showing up at all. And so I think that's one of my biggest fears. I think something that all of us can do to help combat that is talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your community. Try to get a sense of what it is that they're consuming. And if it's, it's one thing if you don't agree with it, you can have that conversation. But if it's in fact not true, walk them through, what's the source of this? And just try to easily show them. And when I say easily, I guess I mean gently. So, you don't want to call anyone stupid or anything, because misinformation is powerful. It works. And so, I wouldn't ever want to call anyone stupid for consuming it and believing it to be true. But any way that you can to help combat that, there's so many videos online that debunk a lot of the misinformation out there. There's so many articles, anything you can do to get that in front of your loved ones, family and friends, that's very helpful. And, if they're susceptible to misinformation, just maybe, deactivating their social accounts until after the election.
Thank you. From Nina on Zoom, how can people make the biggest difference in the home stretch? What should people be doing over the next 3 weeks to really have an impact?
Yeah, if you have, first vote. If you haven't voted, make sure that you vote, get your ballot in. You can actually go to votesaveamerica.com/states and find your state. And we have information about voting in person, by mail, and in person early or on election day. We have all the information you need on how to do that. So that should be number one. But once you do that, make a plan for how you're going to spend the rest of your day. So some people feel comfortable, calling strangers, knocking on doors, and texting people. If you feel comfortable talking to people that you don't know, I would encourage you to go to votesaveamerica.com and find a volunteer opportunity to do those things. For some people, they are less comfortable doing that. But you can talk to your family and friends and your community members, because we, phone banks and texting and canvassing and all of those conversations have a really big impact. But an even bigger impact you can have is with the people who know and trust you. If you can talk to them about why it's important to vote and the impact of their vote on this election, you can probably, choose 5 people, call them, make sure that they are registered, and ask them if they have a plan to vote, because that can make the difference. If all of us took 5 people and did that, you look at the turnout, or a lot of states where elections come down to tens of thousands of votes at the presidential level. And if you go further down the ballot, you have city council races that are sometimes decided by 10 votes. So all of these votes matter. So if you can talk to a few family members, that could be the difference. And then you multiply that by everyone doing that, and it could really make a difference.
Do you want to talk any more about the importance of down ballot voting?
Yes, I would love to. I will first say, I think the presidential election is very important. I don't want to diminish it in any way. But, you know, and I'm going to tie this back to something I was talking about before. So often and I think the media is a big reason this is true, we focus on federal elections, especially the presidential election, as if the president is the only person who can kind of determine what our country looks like. But in actuality, it's all levels of government working together that determines what our country looks like. So, you know, in the Senate, they confirm our Supreme Court justices. They actually confirm the president's cabinet. A lot of and you know, we focus a lot on the Supreme Court, but justices throughout our lower courts are also confirmed by the Senate. So they're making a lot of decisions there. And then you go to the state legislatures. A lot of them draw the maps that decide who gets to be in the U.S. House of Representatives and then who is in the state legislatures. And so the census, as we know, is, if you haven't filled out your census, make sure you do that. But that is happening right now. And I think the deadline is very soon. But the information we get from the census this year will determine what our districts look like next year. And if you've heard of gerrymandering, that is when that happens. Once, you know, elected officials start drawing the maps, they typically draw them in ways that benefit them. And again, that is something that has happened in a really bad way in North Carolina. But again, those are state legislatures making those decisions, not the president, not the Senate. And then you go a little further. We've seen a lot of the unrest in response to police violence and racial violence that has been happening throughout the country. And there's always this, you know, specifically with in response to police violence, there's always this, we get to this moment where it's like, okay, what's going to happen? Is this police officer going to be held accountable? That is up to, you know, one, a police chief sets the tone for his or her police department. So you want to know who's there. The mayor typically chooses the police chief. You can't elect the police chief, but you can elect the mayor. And then you think about the prosecutors who are making these decisions as to whether or not to, you know, bring charges against police officers or just anyone in general. You look at Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery, and there were no charges for some time because we'll just say we don't know why. But, you know, I think we can connect the dots there. And again, those are prosecutorial decisions. We get to elect a lot of those prosecutors. So a lot of these positions often run unopposed because no one's thinking about the significant role that they play in our lives, but they play a huge role. And the last thing I'll say is they are normally decided by so few votes. In Virginia in 2017, the control of their state house there, their House of Delegates, it came down to pulling a name out of a hat. There was one race where both candidates got the same number of votes, and to settle who would win, they pulled a name out of a hat, and the Republican ended up winning. You know, his name was pulled out of the hat, and that allowed Republicans to keep, I think it stayed 50-50, but had the Democrat won, they would have had a one-person advantage. So there are just so many things that are happening at the state and local level. I would never say that they are more important than the presidency, but I would say they are just as important as those federal elections.
Thanks. Maddie, do you have more questions from the audience? I'm sure you do.
You sure do, yeah. So from Katie on Instagram, when having conversations with friends and family, what is the best way to address very legitimate fears about election tampering without giving into the whole fake news, voter fraud, pandemonium mindset?
So concerns that like the election is like people are breaking the law, or? I
think it probably, you know, people who are concerned to vote by mail because they keep hearing about ballots being lost or something like that. And how do you address those fears? Yeah,
you know, sometimes it's hard to talk people out of their fears. I think first and foremost, people should know that any way that they want to vote is safe. The media always takes, you know, an instance of one thing and you see it on every channel and it's turned into kind of just what's happening. So sometimes it can be hard to combat that, but I would first just tell them that USPS has told us that our elections are safe and fine and mail will travel through the system. It might take a little longer, so you should send in your ballot as early as possible, but people should not be concerned that their ballots are just going to kind of end up not making it to their elections office. But what I would actually do, just to give that person peace of mind and not just, take my word for it, is let them know their options. Something we did on Vote Save America, again, on each of the state pages, is we called and we reviewed the websites of all of the Secretary of States and election officials throughout the country. And we wanted to answer those questions. So if you get your ballot maybe a little too close to election day and you want to make sure it gets in, like, what are my options? We have all of that listed there. If I've requested my ballot and it hasn't gotten to me, do I have an alternative option to vote in person? Now that varies by state, but we answered all of those questions on the site. So one, I would tell them to go check out the site and see what the answers to that in their state are. But generally you can tell people that if you don't want to vote by mail, you just don't have to. You can vote in person. We are suggesting that people vote early, but you can also vote on election day if for whatever reason you're not able to vote early. But also you can get your ballot, you can receive it in the mail, but you can turn it in person. You'll just have to look up, where you can do that. Oftentimes it is at your local election official's office. And a lot of states actually have drop boxes. So you can get your ballot in the mail, fill it out, and then drive it to a drop box, which is secure and the same as, dropping it off in person. Or again, you can vote in person. So, I am someone who likes to convince people that they have nothing to worry about, but we have 19 days left. And so if that's not working, then just tell them their options so that they can feel comfortable with whichever decision they make.
Thanks, Shaniqua. From Diana on Facebook, how long do you think the counting will take and what should we all expect after November 3rd?
Yeah, I will start with this. The earlier people get their ballots in, the sooner they can be counted. What we'll have to wait for is if everyone waits until the last minute to turn in their ballot, and then they're still coming in days after election day, and then we have to wait for them to be counted. So turn it in early, and then it can be counted as soon as the state is allowed to start counting ballots. But to set expectations, I think everyone should just be prepared not to maybe know the election results on election day or election night, which is fine. It doesn't mean anything bad has happened. It just means that there are a lot of people who did not vote early, and so their votes still have to be collected. I think it will be really important not to, not to feed into any hysteria that is happening around that. In 2018, in Arizona, I think in 2018, 75% of voters voted by mail. It's a very vote by mail heavy state. It's something that they encourage. And on election night, a lot of people thought that Kyrsten Sinema had lost her Senate race to Martha McSally. And then, about a week went by and the person who actually won was Kyrsten Sinema. We saw the same thing in California in a lot of the seats that flipped from Republican to Democrat in Orange County, and just generally in Southern California. And I was one person who was very upset on election night because I felt like all this work had been done and what for? But then a week or two goes by and you start to see all the results again, in California, a lot of people vote by mail. So these results are still coming in. So I think we might see a lot of that. I know people will get anxious and want the results immediately, but it's important to trust our election officials that they are, taking this time to be thorough, waiting for all the ballots that have been postmarked by when they need to be postmarked and received, and giving them time to count those so that we can have an accurate, accurate election results and not rush it just because we're anxious.
Shaniqua. So bringing it back a little before then, from Lee on Zoom, for those who are voting on election day, what do you expect November 3rd to be like?
I have no way of definitively knowing this, just because, again, because of the pandemic, a lot of people are voting by mail. And a lot of groups like Vote Save America and a lot of groups in the voting space have been encouraging people to vote early. So, if all of that checked out, I would expect voting day or election day to be pretty easy, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we'll still have a lot of people who decide to vote on election day because it's something that they're used to doing. It's a tradition and they like to vote on that day. So I think, you should just prepare for long lines. You might not encounter them, but it's better to be prepared for that. If you need snacks, bring them, and just, again, make a plan to vote that incorporates the time you may need to vote. Excuse me. And just make sure you wear a mask and stay socially distant. I think just being safe is the most important thing that you should plan for. And other than that, yeah, we don't really have a way of knowing, but I think every election day, a lot of people show up on election day, so we probably can anticipate that again.
Yeah, and as Shaniqua said, make a plan. Bring snacks, bring liquid. You don't want to get dehydrated. Bring a folding chair if you can. You've seen the long lines. I think there was a 10-hour wait in Georgia.
Yeah.
People, they hung in there though. They did it.
Yeah.
Just be prepared for a long time and do whatever you need to do so that your feet won't hurt, your back won't hurt.
Yeah. And then after you vote, and after you vote, then hopefully you will elect people who will make sure that you don't ever have to wait in a line that long again.
Right.
Very true. Val on Facebook would like to know, what do you think is the best way to help get Bernie voters to vote for Biden instead of voting third party or not at all?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's important to kind of explain to people, although I think after 2016 we should see this, but I think it's important to explain to people what a third party vote is. I would be amongst the people who say it sucks that we have a two-party system, because there are so many people who don't have, and I shouldn't say I do, so many people whose top option is not on the ballot this year. And, I'm not even thinking about the Democratic primary, but just generally the person that you would if you could create your perfect candidate, most of us do not get to vote for that person. That aside, I think it's important to point out that third-party candidates traditionally have not been successful in presidential elections. That is something that hopefully we can change one day, but with the election that's ahead of us right now, it's really important to think about what you want your vote to count for. If you look at Michigan, where the vote came down to 10,704 votes or something like that, something around there, Gary Johnson actually got more votes than what the difference between the top two candidates were. And so if you actually are voting and you want your vote to go toward a candidate who will do things, who can get elected to do the things that you want them to do, it's really important to be honest with yourself about whether or not this third party can win. I know that people feel like they wanted to vote for someone else and didn't get that opportunity. And hopefully I don't come off too preachy with what I'm about to say. But specifically in the Democratic primary, we did have a primary. And Bernie, I think more people needed to show up for him. And something I said to a friend once was just that, what did you do in the primary? We have who we have as a nominee now on the Democratic side, but if you really wanted your person to be elected, did you knock all the doors? Did you call all the people? Did you send all the texts? Because that is where you get to elevate your candidate to get to the nomination. That did not happen. I think Bernie Sanders, though, did do, at least for progressives and the folks who support him, did do a good job of bringing Joe Biden over on some policies. So one, I think we can't discount the impact that Bernie Sanders had, even though he didn't win the election. And I think we also can look at the fact that Bernie Sanders is supporting Joe Biden. So, if you voted for him and supported him in the primary, I would like to think that you still value, his thoughts and opinions on what we should move forward with. But the last thing I'll say around voting third party, in this election and in our political environment where we only have two major parties, a third party vote is essentially, it can help one candidate or it can effectively be a non-vote. And I have to say, for me, withholding a vote just because I'm not getting everything I want, I think is a little unfair. I am a Black woman, so I sit at intersections that other people don't. There's a lot of things that I really need that other people might not understand. So they just fight for the things that they need or want and don't understand that those small steps in progress might do a great deal for me. But then I think about, you know, a Black trans woman with a disability. She needs a lot more than I do. And so I can't say, well, we can't get those small gains for her because I need the big things that I need. And so I think it's really important to recognize that you're not elected officials aren't saviors. They can't give you everything you want, but elect the person who will get you as close as you can to what you want, and then keep pushing them on the other things that you want. But when we say, you know, I want all or nothing, there are a lot of people whose livelihood, like their next days are going to be tied to whoever is in office. There are people being evicted right now because of coronavirus who can't feed their families, who don't know when they're ever going to get another paycheck, another job, and that is directly tied to this election. So, you know, if those things appeal to the people you're talking to, I think that you should use those. And some people just are kind of, you won't be able to convince them. And that's okay. I think it's still worth trying to. But I think for most people, they see what's happening around us and just need to kind of have a little nudge to remember that voting is not an individualistic act. In order for voting to have the impact that we want it to have, we all have to do it together. It has to be a collective activity. And so voting third party is kind of like not voting.
It's a vote for Trump. It is. You know, I'm going to repeat something I've said before that Annie Leonard said. When you vote, you're voting for your opponent, for the person that you want to be your opponent. And you always want an opponent that will be able to be pressured and influenced, right? Mm-hmm. Well, so wouldn't you rather hold your nose and vote for a centrist who can be pushed rather than be fighting a fascist who won't ever do anything that you want?
Yeah.
And in essence, that's what you're voting for if you don't vote. You're voting for the fascists.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I try not to, I was trying not to point fingers, but what Jane just said is spot on.
Thank you, Shaniqua. From Joanne on Zoom, what procedures and policies do you think need to be put in place to make voting easier and more accessible for everyone?
Yeah, I think, okay, this will probably sound a little controversial, but I think in the future, there's one state that does this. I don't want to mess it up. I think it's Idaho or North Dakota. You don't have to register to vote. And so I think if we got rid of voter registration, that would make voting a lot more accessible. But putting that aside for policies that are a little bit more within reach, automatic voter registration, a lot of states do this already. You know, to me, there's no reason that someone should, you know, not just be automatically registered to vote. Any efforts, and we see this, you know, in Ohio, they purge a lot of voters. Georgia, they do it too. But having the ability to do that is just a form of voter suppression. Voters should just be automatically registered when they move, you know, and update their information with the DMV. You should not have to jump through hoops to vote. I think every state should have early voting. You know, more states are doing it. I think most states do it. But there's no reason, if you can vote absentee by mail, that is what early voting is. And so you should be able to show up in person and do that too. I think all states should allow people to vote by mail without any restrictions. Some states have changed their rules this election because of coronavirus, if people don't want to show up in person to vote because they're fearful that they might catch coronavirus that way. But to me, there's no reason why you should need a special excuse to vote by mail. It's a way that people can vote and everyone should be able to vote that way. Also, voter registration online. There's a lot of states, you know, North Carolina just started that, or maybe that was absentee ballot requests. But registration online, like people are on their phones and computers all the time. There's no reason that we can pay bills online and, you know, send our bank accounts into what is a secure space and not trust that people can register online. You know, a lot of the policies that need to be put in place, in my opinion, are not in place because voter suppression is what people would rather advance. Really quick story, North Carolina in the 90s had low voter participation, they did a study to find out why, and they implemented a lot of pro-voter policies. So like early voting, same-day registration, and then after the Shelby v. Holder decision that struck down part of the Voting Rights Act, they kind of just started walking back all of that, all of those pro-voter policies. And so I say that to say at some point, these efforts were bipartisan, but something happened along the way where preventing certain people from vote became the priority. So yeah, I kind of went on a tangent, but those are the policies I think we should have in place.
Thanks, Shaniqua. And speaking of mail-in ballots, Veronica on Zoom would like to know, what happens if you make a mistake on your mail-in ballot?
Oh, that is a good question. I would call my local election official, and you can find that also on Vote Save America. But I would look up my local elections official office and call them. I think every state is probably going to be different about what you can do. The thing that just popped in my head is probably wrong, so I'm not going to say that. But I would say call your local election officials, because in some states you might need to be issued a new ballot.
I want to pipe in here because I'm seeing in the chat box, people are really paranoid about the possibility of if it's not a clear victory and the votes aren't all counted, that Trump is going to call in the military. And I'd like to know how you feel about that. I'll tell you how I feel. I think that he wants us to think that, so we'll be scared and we won't go to the polls and all of that. But you know, there was even an article today in one of the papers that I read that Republicans are starting to back away from wanting to repeal the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. People are backing away from Trump. I don't know if any of you watched the town hall last night. It was abominable. He's shrinking. Yeah. He's not what he was. And people are abandoning ship. The wheels are coming off. Military, high-ranking military people are saying, don't vote for this guy. I don't think the military would follow his orders, but what do you think, Shaniqua?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think he's trying to scare people into not voting so that, you know, whatever has already been voted can be counted and he can just declare that he's won. Something that Donald Trump did in 2016 and is doing now is this subtle form of voter suppression that just convinces people their vote does not matter. That is not illegal, but it does have an effect of people staying at home because they think nothing's going to change. So I think that he is just trying to scare people. And I know it sounds like a lot to say the president is threatening, you know, our lives and we need to go vote anyway. But I think it is a scare tactic. And you're right, Republicans are backing away from him. I think that kind of strongman persona that he's had for so long, you know, it's deteriorating. And I think a lot of people can see the writing on the wall. So what I would say to that again is, I sound like a broken record, vote early, just get your vote in so that we can know the results as soon as possible. But also, it's not new for us to have to wait for mail-in votes to come in. The examples I mentioned in Arizona and California, and we just need to know that ourselves. If he wants to rant about things, we can let him rant about things, but we know that we need to wait for the election results to come in. And once they do, I think all of us will honor them for what they are. But yeah, I mean, I have no way of knowing, I don't know enough about the military to know how it operates, but I think we have enough, we do have enough leaders in Washington to make sure that that things will go the way that they need to. But we can't let these, you know, these things being said get under our skin and scare us out of participating in our democracy.
Fred Atkinson wrote in the chat box, the incredible shrinking president. We'll eat him for Thanksgiving. No, never mind. Let's erase what I just said there. Maddie, let's go with another audience question.
Sure. From Ray on Facebook. How would you encourage the young voters, those who have just turned 18 or are about to turn 18?
Yeah, you know, I think they know what's going on in a way that maybe other generations of 18-year-olds haven't. I remember I was reading over a poll last year that talked about gun violence it had a lot of questions. It was polling young people, but there was a distinction between a school shooting and gun violence for them. And a school shooting was like their top concern, which, you know, in my head, I'm thinking gun violence and school shootings are in the same, are the same thing, essentially, you know, school shooting being a subset of gun violence, but it's something very specific to them. And I think the Parkland students, we saw the response to that. And I think especially climate change has been something that has really motivated young people. You know, I am not 18. And so I think, you know, well, who knows, but I think I'll be here, you know, not long enough to see the full impacts of climate change. But I think young people know that who is in office will determine if they get to see their futures. So part of me is saying, I don't think we have to convince them that much, but for the young people who do need convincing, I think that's something that civics education in the United States doesn't do a good job of doing. It teaches you what the different branches of government are and what they do, but it doesn't tell you, okay, this is how these people actually impact your everyday lives. So I think talking to young people about, you know, the decisions that elected officials make about climate change, about guns and who has access to them and why people are able to come into their schools and you know, kill them, and tying all that to voting is how we can encourage them to vote. And, you know, on top of that, there is research that if young people have a good first voting experience, that they will be lifelong voters and continue to do it. I mean, that's not something you tell them, because I think that would be indifferent for them. But for us, those of us who are encouraging them to vote, I think it's important to keep that in mind and like don't let up on it. But I do think young people are surprising us now more than ever, especially around climate change. You know, you can't. It's hard to care about all the other things if you might not be here to have an impact on them. And so I think that they are just showing us that young people, as usual, lead the way. But I do think there's a greater connection to voting with all of the things that they are fighting for now.
Thanks, Shaniqua. And I think we know the answer to this next one, but I just want to ask it so we can all make it super clear. Eddie on Zoom, I don't live in a swing state, so does it really matter if I vote?
Yes, 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 yes. You know, something I always think about is that, so in 2016, about 55% of eligible voters voted. And I think about California a lot. Everyone says California is a super blue state, reliably goes for Democrats. And I always think, well, what if that 45% of, you know, California that didn't vote, what if they were actually Republicans? Then this state would not be as blue, you know, as we think. And as I said before, voting is a collective action. So, you know, we all have to participate in order for it to have an impact. And, you know, okay, we are where we are. States like California, you know, it will go blue and Joe Biden will get most of those electoral votes. But as I mentioned before, the presidency isn't the only thing that matters. There are so many down ballot races that are decided by a handful of votes that, of course, your vote is important. Thinking specifically about California, who has a lot more progressive environmental and climate change policies, those have nothing to do with the president. They have nothing to do with anyone in Washington, D.C. They have everything to do with the local elected, state and local elected leaders who Californians have elected. So to think your vote doesn't matter, like someone wants you to think that, but it actually does. And then you think about statewide ballot initiatives. Florida in 2018 passed Amendment 4, which gave returning citizens the right to vote. They needed 60% of the vote to pass that. 50% wasn't enough. So that amendment passed with over 60% of the vote. I think it was maybe 68%, but look that up, don't quote me on it. But we also saw in 2018, Andrew Gillum, a Democrat, lost, and Bill Nelson, a Democratic senator, lost. And I think most people would have assumed that if we pass an amendment that allows formerly incarcerated people to vote, then we would also elect Democrats. But what we saw is people voted in different ways, but every vote did matter. And although, you know, some Democrats were disappointed that night, a lot, I think over 1 million people became eligible to vote after that amendment was passed. So there are so many things besides, the Electoral College that we have to think about when we're voting. So yes, every vote matters. I will always stick to that.
Thank you. From Lucas on Zoom, in your opinion, what is the most important thing we can do in the next year to help fight climate change?
Well, not to sound like a broken record, the first thing is vote for people who believe in climate change and that it matters. But I think even as we've seen through this campaign, there's one candidate who's being in the presidential race, being, thoughtful and just honest about the existence of climate change. And so one, looking at the candidates and what they're proposing, but also Joe Biden, he worked with progressives on pulling his climate plan together. So instead of, if there's anyone out there who feels compelled to just say, I don't want to be part of that, that's not my candidate. And if he wins, I don't want to help him in any way. That is definitely counterproductive. And it's already been made clear that there's space at the table for people to push Joe Biden on these issues. And then don't just focus on the presidency. There are so many local elected leaders who make decisions about, what companies can come and operate in your state. Do those companies have a large carbon footprint? If so, you want elected leaders who are going to say either you need to change maybe your manufacturing processes or you don't get to come into our state to operate. So, first vote, first see where the candidates stand on climate change. Vote for the ones who are doing the right things. And then once they're in office, keep pushing them. And consider, and when you're considering, the impact of climate change, consider it, think about it with everything that you do. Like any issue you care about, for instance, if you care about transportation, this is an obvious one, but there's often this push and pull between, do we give money to roads and bridges or do we give money to public transportation? Public transportation is, when you're thinking about climate change, it's definitely where we should be investing our funds because more people can travel without having individual vehicles on the road. So whatever issue you're thinking about, try to consider it through the lens of climate change. And as you're electing people, as you're holding elected officials accountable, and even as you're living your own life, consider all of that in the decisions that you make. But the biggest thing we need to do is hold corporations more accountable. And yeah, that's going to be on our elected leaders.
Thanks, Shaniqua. From Linda on Zoom, what are your thoughts on the Electoral College and will it ever change?
My thoughts are we should not have it. So I will just say that is me personally, not on behalf of Crooked, but as the question that was just asked about, does my vote matter? There is a reason that a handful of states are being focused on right now. If the popular vote was what determined who our president was, then everyone would be getting attention. Everyone's individual vote would be just as valuable. But when you look at a state like Wyoming, who has, like a tenth of the population of LA, every state gets at least 3 electoral votes. And they are unfortunately having more of a say in who our president is. I don't really know any other way to put that, but people in less populous states, their vote counts more. And I think anything that gives someone's vote more weight in deciding who our president is, I just don't think that's fair. Whether or not I think it'll be, changed, I think it could happen. Do I think it's happening like tomorrow? Absolutely not. But, this is where I go back and forth. I think it's still important for us to not completely ignore people who live in Midwestern states that are not heavily populated, but that is also, the Senate makes up for that because every state has the same amount of senators. So I don't think we need both the Senate and, the Senate filled the way it is with everyone getting 2 senators and the Electoral College, because it has given a certain group of people a lot more say in who our elected leaders are. And we don't need to look too much further than 2016 to see millions more people voted for one candidate, but the other candidate won because of 3 states that were decided by, again, in Michigan, like 10,000 votes, and then Wisconsin and Pennsylvania about, over 40,000 votes. But That is not a lot of people to have determined who our president is. So I think we should get rid of it, but I don't know when that will happen.
Thanks, Shaniqua. I think we have time for about one more question from Debbie on Zoom. Do you know of any programs or talking points that give people ideas of what they can do after they have voted, like how to support those people in the long lines, for instance, helping to provide water, snacks, other support, et cetera, to keep them motivated and in line?
Yeah, so I'm so glad I get to close on this. I would encourage everyone to go to votesaveamerica.com. So again, if you want to call folks and turn them out to vote, I think that's really important to do after you vote. But also, if the deadline hasn't passed in your state, see if you can be a poll worker. How many polling locations are open is heavily dependent on how many poll workers are available. If there's not enough poll workers, polling locations will close, which means that people are going to be standing in longer lines as they're waiting to vote. I think that Pizza to the Polls may be accepting volunteers. That's a group that will be making sure that people have food as they're waiting in line. And then also voter protection. So that's also on votesaveamerica.com. But voter protection volunteer opportunities are really important. There needs to be people there making sure that, a poll worker isn't telling someone, oh no, you can't vote because of X, Y, Z, and that being incorrect. Voter protection volunteers can step in and say, hey, this is actually what's supposed to happen. This person should be able to vote. So there are a lot of things you can do. And I think, handing out water and things like that are important, but also just making sure that people's rights are protected. There are still a lot of opportunities now where you can call, if you don't live in a state that needs voter protection volunteers, you can call into other states and recruit volunteers to do that work. So if you go to votesaveamerica.com, there is, sorry, I don't know the site like the back of my hand. I should, but in the top right corner, I think there's a volunteer button. You can also go to votesaveamerica.com/everylastvote. And there you can find opportunities to participate, like be a poll worker, to make sure that everyone's vote is counted. And after the election, if necessary, I think you can also volunteer to help watch ballot counting and making sure all of that is happening the way it's supposed to. So there are a lot of options there for people to get involved after they vote.
Shaniqua, our time is up. I'm so grateful to you. It's been just swell being able to have the audience asking you such important questions and you being right there with these wonderful answers. Thanks for taking the time
thank you
to help us. Thanks for your thoughtful answers. Thanks for the amazing work that you do and your team to save America.
Thank you. And thank you for doing these and all of your work. I always think it's amazing when people with large platforms bring attention to issues. So thank you.
And thanks to everybody for your wonderful, thoughtful questions. Keep them coming because we're going to do our best to answer the questions that we didn't get to answer right now. And I also just want to say something because I know that in the chat box, people are recommending movies for you to watch. Last night, I saw 2 Netflix movies that I think are must watch. One is My Octopus Teacher. Please watch it. And right after that, watch A Life on Our Planet, David Attenborough's message to the world. It is a must watch. Thanks. The election has begun. Millions of people have already voted. Early voting and vote by mail are officially underway in dozens of states around the country. We need all hands on deck to help voters make a plan to vote early and safe. I feel like we're in a competitive situation here between Pod Save America and Fire Drill Fridays. Either one, for us, visit firedrillfriday.com/vote to make your own plan to vote and then join a volunteer team to help thousands of others to do the same, because we gotta keep building this momentum. And you know, the scary truth is there are people who are willing to threaten our very democracy to hold on to power and maintain the status quo. But we also know that if Trump tries to scam the election by challenging the legitimacy of the results or trying to stop the count, we're going to need ongoing public mobilization and nonviolent protest to ensure that our institutions uphold the rule of law and honor the outcome of the election. Greenpeace is working to ensure that every vote is counted. You can visit firedrillfriday.com/vote to find more information and join us for that too. It's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe. Stay safe. I think I said stay safe. Stay safe and healthy, and take good care of each other, and exercise your right to vote, because we can do this. See you next time.